So, empires rise and fall, right? But what do they actually leave behind? Well, today we're going to explore a really powerful set of ideas that argue, the ghosts of empire, they're still walking among us. They're shaping everything from our politics to the stories we tell. Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, just try to picture this for a second. An empire so huge it controlled over 1/5 of all the land on the entire planet. That was the British Empire at its peak. But here's the thing. Its real influence, it wasn't just about lines on a map. It was like this invisible empire, one built in our minds and in our cultures. And honestly, it's a complex legacy we're still trying to figure out today.
So how do these empires change not just the world, but the way we actually think? Well, that question, that's the absolute core of a field of study called post-colonial criticism. The best way to think about it is like a special lens, one that helps us see how the colonial past isn't really past at all. It's still alive and kicking in our present. All right, so to really get the response, first we've got to understand the wound itself, and that means digging into the massive scale of modern imperialism.
So, historians basically see modern imperialism happening in 3 big waves, or 3 acts, if you will. The first one kicks off way back in 1492 with early European colonization. Then you get to the mid-19th century and boom, it just explodes into this mad scramble for power. And finally, after World War II, the game totally changes. It's less about direct control and more about a new kind of struggle for global influence.
So what was driving all this expansion? Well, it was this really complex, kind of toxic mix. I mean, of course you had the obvious stuff, economic greed, strategic power, but what's really fascinating and kind of disturbing is how they justified it all. They used these warped ideas like social Darwinism, this belief that nations were in a natural struggle for survival, and they wrapped it all up in this so-called moral justification, the incredibly arrogant idea that they were bringing a superior civilization to everyone else.
And this quote, wow, this just perfectly captures the cultural mindset of the empire. A British historian named Thomas Macaulay actually said this, arguing that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. I mean, the sheer confidence. But here's the kicker. He later admitted he didn't know a single word of either Sanskrit or Arabic. Just incredible.
But of course, empires don't last forever. And the 20th century saw this historic shift. A world fighting back. This was the reckoning.
So, after World War II, the old imperial powers were just weakened. They were crumbling. And this created a massive power vacuum. A literal firestorm of change swept the globe. You see India gaining independence in 1947, and that was like a huge spark that lit the fuse for movements everywhere. But this wasn't just about politics, It was also a battle of ideas, being fought in landmark books and major international conferences. And it was right here, out of this history of colonization and this massive fight for freedom, that a totally new way of thinking was born. A new critical lens.
And that's what post-colonial criticism is, formally. It's a school of thought that's all about the effects of imperialism, economic, political, cultural, you name it. Its whole goal is to flip the script, to analyze history and culture not from the top down, but from the perspective of the people who were colonized.
Okay, and this is so important to get. This isn't just some passive academic thing. Post-colonial criticism has clear, active goals. It's about re-examining history from the perspective of the colonized. It's about analyzing the deep cultural and psychological impacts. And it's even about participating in the real-world goals of political and cultural liberation. So, of course, this field was shaped by several key thinkers. These were the people who gave us the big ideas, the essential tools for this kind of analysis.
You have people like Frantz Fanon, who analyzed the intense psychological effects of colonization. Then there's Edward Said, who came up with this game-changing idea of Orientalism, showing how the West basically constructed this biased, often fantastical image of the East. Gayatri Spivak asked this really powerful question, can the subaltern speak? Basically, can the most marginalized people ever truly have their own voice heard? And Homi Bhabha explored hybridity, this idea of being in between two cultures, which really challenges any idea of a pure identity.
And this all illustrates why these ideas still matter so much today. This isn't just academic theory, it's about decolonizing the mind. It challenges some of our most basic assumptions about culture, knowledge, and power.
Okay, take the literary canon, for example. The list of books we're all told are the greats, usually a straight line from Homer to someone like T.S. Eliot. Well, post-colonial critics look at that and ask a really simple but powerful question. Whose voices are missing here? Whose stories got labeled as unimportant?
And it goes even deeper, right down to the words themselves. The language you speak can be a battleground.
For a brilliant author like Chinua Achebe, it was a real dilemma. Do you write in English, the colonizer's language, to reach a huge global audience, or do you write in your indigenous language to express a more authentic cultural experience? It's a tough choice.
The Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o took this idea even further. I mean, he actually wrote a famous essay called On the Abolition of the English Department. He argued for this really radical shift in education, wanting to center African languages and literatures, all laid out in his book, Decolonizing the Mind.
So, what does this all mean for us? Well, it leaves us with a final, really powerful question. Post-colonial criticism isn't just some dusty academic theory. It's really an invitation for all of us to think critically about what stories have shaped our own world, and maybe most importantly, to ask, who gets to tell them?